Alright, so for this next video, what we're going to take a look at is setting up the list view for the toppings. So one of the things to keep in mind about the toppings that is unique from the crusts is that in the previous setup, we used radio buttons and checkboxes because of the fact that with crusts, we always want to make sure that only exactly one thing could be selected, whereas with toppings, we set it up in such a way that it was possible that multiple things could be selected simultaneously, so they were a bit more independent in that sense. So I want to do something kind of similar here. But with the way that this is currently set up, by default, whenever we create a list view, we can only ever select one item at a time. So instead, what I want to do is modify the selection mode of this so that rather than being just a single selection, we could have multiple selections simultaneously. So to do that, there's actually another control that I want to go ahead and introduce to this. So go ahead and go from our JavaFX, scene, control, and then the selection mode. So this selection mode is going to allow us to change it from the single selection mode to the multiple selection mode. Alright, so let's go ahead and do all of that real quick. So we're going to have our list view for our toppings. This will again just be a set of strings. So we'll just set the type for this to string. Make our toppings list view. This is equal to a new list view, also of type string. We can then go ahead and set up the structure of this. So we'll do that underneath all of the code related to setting up the structure and functionality of the crusts list view. So right here we're going to do the toppings list view. We're going to get the items for this again so that we can add all those two toppings that we want to look at, which are pepperoni and bacon. We can then go ahead and set the size for this one. So we're going to do our toppings list view dot set pref size. Again, the width doesn't really matter too much. The main thing is going to be the height. For this one, since we only have two items, I'm going to make this one a little bit shorter. We're going to do 55 pixels for the height. And then the last thing I want to go ahead and do for this is set up the selection mode for it. So we're going to do our toppings list view dot get selection mode, or selection model, and then we can go ahead and set the selection mode. So we'll use the method set selection mode, and then the thing that we'll pass into this is going to be our selection mode, and then we want to specify a particular attribute, a constant that comes with selection mode, which is going to be multiple. Alright, so this is going to specify that we can now select multiple things at once in this toppings list view. So then I'll go ahead and add this to my VBox. Go ahead and save it like that. We'll compile this and run it. And now we can see the additional list view here for our two toppings. So we can select pepperoni, we can select bacon. So we have the ability to select each of these individually by just clicking on that particular item. If you want to be able to select multiple items, it's somewhat similar to, say maybe with email, say like Outlook for example. If you hold down either the, say command or the control key, depending on if you're on a Mac or Windows machine, or if you hold down the shift key and click another item in the list, then you can start to select multiple items. So in this case, if I hold down the command key on my Mac and then click on bacon, I can go ahead and select both of these. So you can see that both of these are actually being highlighted now. So in this case now, both the pepperoni and bacon are being selected at the same time, and whenever we start setting up the functionality for this, we need to be able to account for a situation where both items are being selected. So the set of methods that we're going to be working with when it comes to a multiple selection mode list view is going to be a little bit different from how it looks for a single selection. Alright, so we'll go ahead and close that and come back over here, and we can go ahead and kind of start setting up the functionality for this. So after setting up the layout for this list view, we can go ahead and start creating the functionality. So this is going to be very similar to what I did for the crusts list view. So we're going to go ahead and get the toppings list view, get our selection model. We will set up a property within our selected item. I'm going to add an event listener to it. And again, I'll do this as a lambda expression. So we're going to use our events, set up the body for it. And then right here, in order to capture all of the items that are being selected, assuming that there might be more than one item selected, I can't simply check for a particular index anymore. So as I did up here, we just did a single integer for index, and we just got whatever the selected index was. But in this case now, what I need to do is actually get possibly get multiple indices at the same time. And the way that that's going to be returned to me by using a slightly different method known as getSelectedIndices, that's going to be given back to me as an observable list. So in order to do that, that means I need to make an object of the observable list class, or at least a variable that can hold the object that I'm getting of the observable list class. Okay, so to do that, I'm going to have to come back up here and also import that observable list. So to do that, we're going to do an import. This is going to come from JavaFX, and this is going to come from a slightly different package now, which is the collections package. So this collections package is basically used to hold a bunch of different classes related to collections in the JavaFX library. So in this case, we're going to be using the observable list class. And so once I've got that, we can come down here and go ahead and make an object of that. So we're going to have our observable list. And similar to our list view, whenever we make an observable list, we again need to specify the data type of the individual items. In this case, I want to do it for integers. But one thing I do need to point out about this is that when I set it up this way, it can't actually take a primitive data type. So I can't just use something like int. Instead, I need to use the class level or the object equivalent of this, which is going to be the integer class. So we're going to do observable list with the integer class. So the individual items of this observable list will be objects of that integer class. I then need to give this a name. So since I call this one index, I'll just call this one indices. And then we're going to take the toppings list view. So we'll go ahead and get that list view that we have. We're going to get the selection model. And then I want to go ahead and get the selected indices. All right, so by using the slightly different method, we've got getSelectedIndices right here, as opposed to getSelectedIndex up here. This can give me more than one index at a time. Okay. The next thing I want to go ahead and do is actually set up the string related to toppings. So similar to what I had before, I'll come up to the top of this program and put in my private string for toppings. This will be initially equal to you have not selected any toppings. So go ahead and set it up like that. And then right here, we can get that topping string. And by default, as part of the checking for it, we can just say that you have not selected any toppings. And then we'll start checking our conditions to see if we should change this in some way before we set the text for our label at the very end of this this event handler. So in order to determine which items have been selected, there are two different things or two different properties that I want to be checking for. The first is going to be the size of this observable list, and then the second thing, after I've checked the size, is to then check to see what items are actually in this observable list. Okay, so the very first one, the easiest one that we can do, is to check to see if the size of this observable list happens to be 2, because the only way in which the size of this observable list could be 2 is if both items are selected. So if I do a check for that, so we're going to say if this indices, my observable list, and then we're going to call the size method. So we're going to use size. This size method will just tell me essentially the size of the observable list, how many items are in it. If that is equal to 2, then that tells me that both items are selected. So I'm just going to go ahead and use the string that tells me that I've selected both pepperoni and bacon. So for toppings, this is going to be equal to you have selected pepperoni and bacon. Okay. for the next two conditions, I'm going to be checking to see if the size is equal to 1, and then I need to also check to see what is in the observable list. So we'll say else if indices.size. So again, we're going to use that size method. This is now equal to 1, and we're also going to check to see if my indices dot, and then I'm going to use the get method, which takes a single parameter, which is going to be the position that I want to get. So the position that I want to get, again, the observable list, just like the list view and just like arrays, is going to be 0 based with its positions of its items. So the item that I want is going to be the 0th, or the item at the 0th position, since that should be the only thing that's in it, if its size is 1. And so then I want to go ahead and check to see the value of whatever is at position 0 in this observable list. So that value is either going to be a 0 for pepperoni, or it's going to be a 1 for bacon. So if this is equal to 0, then that tells me that the item that I have selected in here is the pepperoni topping. So we'll say that this is equal to you have selected pepperoni. Okay. And then finally, we'll do another else if. Again, we're going to check to see if the size is equal to 1. And if the thing that is at position 0 of my observable list is the number 1, that tells me now that bacon was selected. So we'll say toppings equal to you have selected bacon. Okay. So this will cover all 3 of the conditions, whether both items are selected or one of the 2 items are selected, and we'll set the string accordingly. All right. And then we'll go ahead and do output.setText. And we'll go ahead and put in the string. So you have selected the plus crust plus the word crust plus the toppings variable. Okay. And then the other thing I need to go ahead and do is right here, set this to toppings, and right here, set this to toppings. All right. So we'll go ahead and save it like that. We'll run it, see if there's anything missing. So go ahead and compile it, run it. Okay, so we see we've got our full string now. You have selected the traditional crust. You have not selected any toppings. We've got our 3 types of crust. So as I choose one of these, we can see the variable related to the crust is changing. I'll then come over here and select one of these. So you have selected pepperoni, so that works fine. You have selected bacon, that works fine. I'll then hold down the command key on my Mac, select pepperoni, and it'll show that you have selected pepperoni and bacon. So there are a couple of things that I want to make a note of. So as we can see, doing it with list views, it seems to work out pretty well. It's a fairly sleek way of designing the interface for this, but there are a couple of things to note about the setup for a list view. One of those, with both these items selected, pepperoni was the last thing that I clicked on. If I click it again, it doesn't really recognize this as a change, so it doesn't really update properly. So I can go ahead and select bacon and then back to pepperoni to kind of fix that. So it's a little bit clunky in that regard. The other problem with a list view that's a bit more notable, without a pretty severe workaround for it, is that there's not actually a way to deselect the items that are in a list view. So what I mean by that is that I can't, at this point, change it back so that I don't select any topping. So admittedly, trying to do this for something like toppings where you might select something but then want to remove it, a list view, just by its default behaviors, wouldn't necessarily be the most effective control to use. But for something like the crust, where you know by default you're always going to have to select at least one thing inside of it, then a list view could actually be a very appropriate control to use for that. All right. So at this point, this will wrap up everything for getting this particular application set up. In the next couple of videos, the first one I want to go ahead and talk a little bit more about the relationship between a list view and arrays, as well as discuss a little bit about the array list class. And then in the video after that, I want to revisit this pizza maker and actually modify it by using some controls for the different items instead of using strings.